The bloodstains on her torn dress told only part of the story. When Marcus Thorne found the girl collapsed against his cabin door in the driving rain, her swollen belly straining against fabric that had once been white, he knew that whatever had driven her into the Oregon wilderness on this October night in 1892 was worse than anything the forest could offer. But it was her words, whispered through blue lips as he lifted her unconscious form, that would haunt him for weeks to come. "Don't let them find me. I bring death to everyone I love." Marcus had been living alone in the Cascade Mountains for 3 years, cutting timber for the railroad companies that were carving their way through the ancient forests. His cabin sat in a clearing 20 miles from the nearest settlement, accessible only by a logging road that became impassable in winter. He had chosen this isolation deliberately, seeking refuge from a world that had taken everything he held dear. The storm that brought the girl to his door was the worst he had seen in years. Lightning split the darkness like fractured bone, and thunder rolled through the mountains with a sound like falling trees. The rain fell in sheets so heavy that Marcus could barely see his own hand when he stepped onto the porch to secure his shutters. That was when he found her. She couldn't have been more than 20, her dark hair plastered to her skull by the rain, her face pale as moonlight. Even unconscious, her hands were pressed protectively over her pregnant belly, which looked to be 7 or 8 months along. Her feet were bare and bloody, her dress torn in several places, and there were scratches on her arms that looked like claw marks. Marcus lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she felt despite her condition. She stirred as he carried her inside, her eyes fluttering open to reveal irises the color of storm clouds. For a moment, she stared at him with terror so pure it made his chest tighten. "Please," she whispered, "don't send me back." "Easy," Marcus said, setting her down on his bed. "You're safe now." "No." Her grip on his wrist was surprisingly strong. "Nowhere is safe. Not while I carry this curse." Marcus had heard plenty of superstition during his years in the logging camps. Men who worked in the deep woods tended to believe in things that city folk dismissed as nonsense. But the desperation in the girl's voice went beyond simple fear. It spoke of something darker, something that had driven her to flee into a storm that could easily have killed her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Ruth. Ruth Blackwood." "Well, Ruth Blackwood, I'm Marcus Thorne, and right now, you need to get warm and dry before you catch your death." Ruth's laugh was bitter. "Death follows me wherever I go. It always has." Marcus helped her out of her soaked dress, averting his eyes as much as possible while wrapping her in one of his wool blankets. Her skin was like ice, and he could see her shivering despite her efforts to remain still. He built up the fire and heated water for tea, moving with the efficient care of a man who had learned to tend to himself in the wilderness. "How far along are you?" he asked as she sipped the hot liquid. 7 months, perhaps 8. It's hard to tell. "And the father?" Ruth's face went dark. "Dead, like everyone else who gets too close to me." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of madness or deception. All he saw was exhaustion, and a grief so profound it seemed to radiate from her like heat from a fire. "You want to tell me what happened?" Ruth was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was born in Salem, Massachusetts. My grandmother always said I was marked, that I carried the shadow of the old troubles in my blood. She died when I was 7, and my mother blamed me for bringing sickness into the house. That's not your fault, isn't it? My father died in a mill accident when I was 12. My brother drowned in the river when I was 16. My mother wasted away with consumption the year after that, cursing my name with her last breath." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "People die, Ruth. It's the way of things. Not like this. Not always around me. Always when they need me most." Ruth's hand moved to her belly. "And now, this child will carry the same curse, the same shadow." "Whose child is it?" Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "A good man. A pastor named William Hayes. He said he didn't believe in curses, that love could overcome any darkness. We were to be married in the spring. What happened to him? The mill where he worked part-time collapsed, killed 6 men, including William. The townspeople said it was my doing, that I had brought judgment down on them for harboring a cursed woman." Marcus felt anger rise in his chest. So they drove you out. They tried to do worse than that. They said the child I carry is tainted, that it would bring evil into the world. They wanted to— Ruth couldn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. So you ran. I ran. Through 3 states, always moving, never staying long enough for the curse to take hold. But it follows me. In Kansas, the family that took me in lost their youngest son to fever. In Colorado, the woman who gave me work died in a riding accident. Everywhere I go, death follows. Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee, his mind racing. He had seen enough tragedy in his own life to understand how grief could twist perception, how a series of coincidences could seem like fate to someone desperate for explanation. You said you bring death to everyone you love, he said finally. But what about people you don't love? Strangers, enemies, people who mean nothing to you. Ruth looked puzzled. What do you mean? I mean, if you really carried some kind of supernatural curse, wouldn't it affect everyone equally? Wouldn't death follow you everywhere, not just to the people you care about? I don't know. Or maybe, Marcus continued gently, tragedy has a way of finding all of us. Maybe you've just had more than your share, and your mind is trying to make sense of it by finding patterns that aren't really there. Ruth stared at him with those storm-gray eyes. You don't believe me. I believe that terrible things have happened to you. I believe that you've suffered more than anyone should have to. But I don't believe you caused any of it. Then you're a fool. Maybe. But I'm a fool with a warm cabin and enough supplies to last the winter. And you're a woman who needs help, curse or no curse. Over the following days, as the storm raged outside, Ruth slowly began to recover her strength. Marcus gave her his bed and slept on the floor near the fire, despite her protests. He cooked simple meals and listened as she told him more about her life, about the series of tragedies that had convinced her she was cursed. Ruth had been born during the worst blizzard in Massachusetts history. Her birth had been difficult, and her mother had nearly died. From that moment on, Ruth's grandmother had whispered about dark omens and family curses, filling the house with superstition and fear. She said our bloodline was tainted, Ruth explained one evening as they sat by the fire, that we carried the mark of the Salem witch trials, that the innocent blood spilled there had cursed our family for generations. And you believed her? When you're a child and everyone around you dies, you start to look for reasons. The curse gave me something to blame besides myself. Marcus nodded, understanding. After his own family had died in a house fire while he was away working, he had spent months convincing himself that he could have prevented it, that he was somehow responsible. Guilt was often easier to bear than the random cruelty of fate. As the days passed, Marcus found himself looking forward to their conversations. Ruth was intelligent and well-read, with a quick wit that she hid behind layers of self-imposed guilt. She knew poetry and literature, could discuss philosophy and religion with equal ease. In different circumstances, she might have been a teacher or a writer, but it was her gentleness that affected him most. Despite believing herself cursed, despite the terror that had driven her into the wilderness, she moved through his cabin with careful grace, always mindful of his space, always grateful for his kindness. She mended his clothes with delicate stitches, cooked meals that reminded him of his mother's kitchen, and brought a warmth to the cabin that had nothing to do with the fire. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one evening. "Why are you helping me?" Marcus considered the question. "Because I know what it's like to be alone. Because I know what it's like to blame yourself for things beyond your control." "What happened to your family?" Marcus stared into the fire, seeing again the orange glow that had lit the sky that terrible night 3 years ago. "House fire. Took my wife and both my children while I was away at a logging camp. By the time I got home, there was nothing left but ashes. I'm sorry. For a long time, I convinced myself it was my fault. That if I had been there, I could have saved them. That I chose work over family and paid the price. But you don't believe that anymore?" "I don't know what I believe. But I know that hiding in these mountains hasn't brought them back. And I know that turning away someone in need won't honor their memory." Ruth reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and surprisingly soft. "They would be proud of you, would they? Or would they wonder why I couldn't save them, but I can save you? Maybe saving me is part of saving yourself." That night, Marcus lay awake, listening to the sound of Ruth's breathing, thinking about the strange turns life could take. 3 days ago, he had been a hermit, content in his isolation. Now he was responsible for a pregnant woman who believed herself cursed, and somehow that responsibility felt more like a gift than a burden. The storm broke on the 4th day, revealing a world transformed by snow and ice. The trees stood like crystal sculptures, and the silence was so complete it seemed to ring in their ears. Marcus stepped onto the porch to assess the damage and saw that the logging road was completely blocked by fallen trees. "We're snowed in," he told Ruth when he came back inside. "Could be weeks before anyone can get through." Ruth's face went pale. "You're trapped here. With me. We're safe here. With each other. Don't you understand? The longer you stay with me, the more danger you're in. The curse doesn't care about your kindness." Marcus sat beside her on the bed, taking her hands in his. "Ruth, listen to me. There is no curse. There's just life, with all its random cruelty and unexpected grace. What happened to your family? To William? To all the others? It wasn't your fault. You can't know that. I can, because I've lived long enough to see that tragedy doesn't need a reason. Sometimes the mill collapses because it was poorly built. Sometimes children drown because rivers are dangerous. Sometimes houses burn because a lamp gets knocked over." Tears streamed down Ruth's face. "But what if you're wrong? What if I really am cursed? What if something happens to you because of me? Then at least I'll have died trying to help someone instead of hiding from the world." As winter deepened, Marcus and Ruth settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. He chopped wood and maintained the cabin while she cooked and sewed and prepared for the child's arrival. They read together in the evenings, sharing books from Marcus's small library, talking about everything from Shakespeare to the Bible, to the political changes sweeping the country. Ruth's pregnancy progressed without complication, which seemed to surprise her. She had expected difficulties, complications that would prove her curse was real. Instead, she bloomed in the mountain air, her color returning, her spirits lifting, despite her lingering fears. "Maybe the baby will be different," she said one evening, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "Maybe the curse skips a generation. Maybe there never was a curse to begin with." "You really believe that?" "I really do." But Marcus's certainty was tested as Ruth's time drew near. The snows had been heavier than usual, and his supplies were running lower than he liked. If complications arose during the birth, there would be no doctor to call, no help available. For the first time since Ruth had arrived, he began to worry that his isolation might prove dangerous. It was during a particularly harsh blizzard in February that Ruth went into labor. Marcus had delivered calves and foals, but he had never attended a human birth. His hands shook as he boiled water and gathered clean cloths, trying to remember everything his mother had told him about midwifery. Ruth labored through the night, her face pale but determined. Between contractions, she gripped Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "If something happens to me," she gasped, "promise me you'll take care of the baby. Don't let them say it's cursed. Nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me." "I promise." The baby came with the dawn, a healthy girl with Ruth's dark hair and strong lungs. Marcus wrapped her in a clean blanket and placed her in Ruth's arms, marveling at the perfect completeness of the tiny fingers and toes. "She's beautiful," Ruth whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect. Of course she is. And so are you." Ruth looked up at him with wonder. "I'm alive. We're both alive. Did you think you wouldn't be? I was certain one of us would die. The curse always takes something precious." Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at mother and child. "Maybe the curse is broken. Or maybe there never was one. Maybe." They named the baby Sarah after Marcus's deceased wife. Ruth worried that using the name might bring bad luck, but Marcus insisted it would honor both women. As the weeks passed and spring began to show its first tentative signs, the baby thrived in the mountain cabin. Ruth proved to be a natural mother, patient and gentle despite her youth. She sang lullabies in a voice that reminded Marcus of wind through pine needles, and she told stories that made even mundane household tasks seem magical. Watching her with the baby, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since his family's death. Hope. "What will you do when the snow melts?" he asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Sarah sleeping peacefully in Ruth's arms. "I don't know. I can't go back east, and I can't keep running forever. You could stay here." Ruth looked at him with surprise. "Here? Why not? The cabin's big enough for 3. Sarah needs stability, and you need somewhere safe to raise her. What about your work, your solitude? I'm tired of being alone, and the logging companies are always looking for families to establish permanent camps. A woman who can cook and sew, a man who knows the woods. We could make a good life here. Ruth was quiet for a long time, studying his face. You would do that? Take on a woman with a questionable past and a child that isn't yours? I would do that for the woman who brought light back into my life, for the child who reminds me that the future is worth fighting for. And if the curse is real, if something terrible happens, then we'll face it together. But I don't think anything terrible is going to happen. I think the worst is behind us. When spring finally arrived, the logging road reopened, and Marcus made his first trip to town in months. He returned with supplies, news, and a visitor who would test his faith in Ruth's innocence. Sheriff Douglas Hartwell had been tracking Ruth for months, following reports of a pregnant woman who brought misfortune wherever she went. He was a hard man, weathered by years of frontier justice, and he looked at Ruth with the suspicion of someone who had seen too much human cruelty. "Miss Blackwood," he said, touching his hat brim, "you've led us quite a chase." "I haven't broken any laws," Ruth replied, holding Sarah protectively. "Maybe not, but there are folks back east who want answers. Folks who think you had something to do with that mill collapse." Marcus stepped between them. "She was here when that happened. With me. So you say. But can you prove it?" "I don't need to prove anything. Ruth is under my protection." Hartwell's eyes narrowed. "Your protection? That's interesting, seeing as how you barely knew her 6 months ago. Makes a man wonder what kind of hold she might have over you. The only hold she has is the one any decent person would feel towards someone in need. Is that right? Well, I've got some interesting news about Miss Blackwood's past. Seems there's a pattern of men dying around her. Her father, her brother, her intended husband. All young, all healthy, all dead under unusual circumstances." Ruth's face went white. "Those were accidents. Were they? Or maybe you're more dangerous than you let on. Maybe you've got a talent for arranging accidents." "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice dangerous. "Is it? Because I'm starting to think Miss Blackwood here isn't the innocent victim she pretends to be. I'm starting to think she's a black widow, using her condition to gain sympathy while she works her poison." Marcus's hand moved to the rifle hanging over the mantel. "I said that's enough." Hartwell smiled coldly. "You threatening an officer of the law, Thorne? I'm protecting my family." "Your family? You marry this woman, did you?" "We will be married, as soon as I can arrange for a preacher." Ruth stared at him in shock. "Marcus, that's if she lives long enough," Hartwell continued. "See, I've got authorization to take her back east for questioning, and I'm thinking a woman who brings death wherever she goes might not survive the journey." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt his world narrowing to this moment, this choice. He could let Hartwell take Ruth, could watch her disappear into a system that had already condemned her, or he could fight for the life they had built together. "She's not going anywhere," he said finally. "You sure about that? Because I've got 6 men waiting outside." "You really want to make this a fight?" Marcus looked at Ruth, seeing the terror in her eyes, the way she clutched Sarah against her chest. He thought about the woman who had mended his clothes and cooked his meals, who had brought laughter back into his cabin. He thought about the baby who carried no curse except the one imposed by fearful men. "Yes," he said, "I really do." What happened next would be talked about in logging camps and frontier towns for years to come. Marcus Thorne, the hermit lumberjack, faced down 7 armed men to protect a woman accused of witchcraft. The fight was brief, but brutal, ending when Hartwell's horse spooked and threw him against a tree, breaking his neck. The other men, seeing their leader dead and facing a man who fought with the fury of the desperate, chose discretion over valor. They rode away, leaving Ruth and Marcus to bury the sheriff in the woods where no one would find him. "They'll send others," Ruth said that night as they sat by the fire. "Maybe, but we'll be ready. You killed a man for me. You've damned yourself for someone you barely know." Marcus looked at her, this woman who had brought purpose back to his life. "I know you better than I knew my own wife by the time we married. I know you're kind and gentle and strong. I know you love that baby more than your own life. I know you've suffered enough for 10 lifetimes. And I know you're not cursed. I know the sheriff was wrong about you, just like everyone else has been wrong. And I know that what we have here is worth fighting for." Ruth leaned against him, Sarah sleeping peacefully in her arms. "What if they're right? What if I really am dangerous? Then I'll take that risk. Because the alternative is living without you, and I won't do that." Years passed. No one came looking for Sheriff Hartwell, and the charges against Ruth were eventually forgotten as the frontier moved on to new scandals and tragedies. Marcus and Ruth were married by a traveling preacher, and they raised Sarah as their own daughter. The curse, if it had ever existed, seemed to have been broken by love and acceptance. Ruth bore Marcus 2 more children, and the family prospered in their mountain home. She became known throughout the region as a skilled midwife and healer, helping other women through difficult births and dangerous illnesses. Marcus continued his logging work, but he also became a guide for settlers heading west, using his knowledge of the mountains to help families find new homes and new hope. The cabin they had shared through that first hard winter grew into a small compound, then a settlement, then a town. When Marcus died of old age at 73, Ruth was by his side. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, proof that love could indeed overcome the darkest circumstances. At his funeral, Ruth spoke of the man who had saved her from the wilderness, who had chosen faith over fear, who had shown her that home was not a place, but a feeling shared between kindred souls. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the mountain wind whispered through the pines, visitors to the town could hear the sound of laughter coming from the old cabin. The laughter of a woman who had learned that she was not cursed but blessed with the love of a good man and the gift of a second chance. The story of the pregnant girl and the lonely lumberjack became legend, passed down through generations as a reminder that sometimes the greatest courage is found not in fighting monsters, but in refusing to believe they exist. It was a story of redemption and hope, of the power of love to transform even the most damaged hearts. And in a world that often seemed dark and dangerous, it offered a simple but profound truth, that we are not defined by our past, but by our choices, and that even the most cursed among us can find salvation in the kindness of strangers who choose to see us not as we fear we are, but as we have the potential to become.